All right, good. Good morning. Hey, we're gonna dive into a couple of questions from the box, and again, we've had a whole lot come in, and I can't answer all of them, but I'm doing my best to answer those that I can. A couple of ones to start. First one here: if fasting was biblical to get closer to God through prayer and starving the flesh, is it wrong to fast for non-biblical reasons, i.e., weight loss? Is there a best way to go about fasting? Oh, for dramatic effect, there we go. Big question, big question. Is it wrong? No. No, not at all. If you want to fast for whatever reason, you can fast. The Bible talks about fasting, and what it does is it always links fasting with prayer. And so if you want to fast, there's a lot of people that do intermittent fasting. There's a whole lot of cool feedback. There is so a lot of you can fast for any reason. There's a big health thing today, right? That a whole lot of scientists have come out and medical professionals saying, hey, these are the benefits of fasting, and this is what it does for your insides and things like that. So if you do it for that reason, awesome. But fasting is a spiritual discipline that should be tied in with prayer. So if you're just fasting for another reason, because you heard that it's healthy, so I'm going to fast one day a week, like, good on you. Just don't think you're being overly spiritual, because you're not combining it with prayer. The power of fasting, I believe, is prayer connects us to God. When we choose to fast, what that does is it separates us from sort of our earthly desires. And so I think so some people have found that when they fast, they feel closer to God. You're foregoing something that you want in order to pursue God. So can you fast for non-biblical purposes or for non-spiritual purposes? 100%. But it's also a powerful spiritual discipline. And just one thought, is there a best way to do fasting? Personally, like, I might be a little bit controversial, but a lot of people today, they're like, I'm going to fast social media. Like, that's good for your mental health, but I don't think that's going to draw you closer to God. I think there's a specific reason why God said to fast food. And when we fast food, there is something about denying ourselves that what we want and that what we're used to in order to draw near to Him. So if you want to do it properly, my suggestion would be to fast food, to use the time that you'd normally eat to pray, so combine it with prayer. And the other one is this: do not make the mistake of thinking, if I fast, then God's going to answer my prayer, in the sense He's going to give me what I want. Your fasting isn't a way to manipulate God. He's not that little. Fasting is something we can do to be more in tune with God and essentially to help us surrender to God. And so the best way to fast, make sure you're combining it with prayer. I know there's people in this church that have fasted for longer periods of time. My suggestion again is if you want to do this, and there is something really powerful about it, start small. Don't go and try to do a 7-day fast. You'll find that really, really hard if you've never done a 1-day fast before. So maybe start with a 1-day fast and maybe 2-day fast, and over time you can extend that. I know there's some people that will be like, I'm going to fast every day. Oh, not every day. I'm going to fast every Monday, for a period of time, because they're really seeking God for something. So that's it. That's a real basic question. There's lots of resources available around fasting. Hope that was an answer to that question. This next one's a lot harder. And I thought I had to address this because of the weight of it. And it said, why would my 11-year-old friend die when lots of people live long lives, when lots of bad people live long lives? And firstly, if that's your experience, I'm so sorry. It's heartbreaking to know that you have had to confront this, that you have had to deal with that level of grief and pain and suffering. And if I'm going to answer this question really honestly, I don't think there is an answer that I could give you that can rationalize this. I think if a child was asking me this, the thing that I'd want to do is show empathy and sit down and listen to them rather than try and give them an answer. I'm sure there's some theological people that could give theological answers to this, but I don't know about you, when you're in a place of grief, when you're really facing something like this, like, Do you really want a theological answer? Like, no. Right? Because you're broken, because you're hurting. And that's a normal human emotion. And the world that we live in is unfair. The world that we live in is broken. That, unfortunately, really bad things do happen to people that don't deserve it. And I think the best thing we can do in this sort of situation isn't to give an answer, but to sit with someone in their grief. To let them know that we're there, to let them know that we care. If it's a young person, I'd encourage them, hey, do you know you can pray about this? I'd let them know you can get angry at God in your prayers. So some people might not like this idea too much, but I think you can actually be gut level honest with God when we pray to him. And so if you're feeling angry and if you're feeling like frustrated, if you're mad at him, do you know you can actually tell him his shoulders are big enough to deal with it? And some people might think, oh, that's irreverent, or how can you talk to God like that? The reality is, if you're thinking it, God already knows that you're thinking it, right? He's God. And so sometimes actually verbalizing it and speaking it to him can do something that settles us on the inside. And if we can combine that with a time of silence and listening, maybe God can speak to us. And so I know that that's a really shallow answer to what is a really, really deep and profound and hard to answer question. But I think that's my advice is not to try and answer it theologically, just to sit with someone, embrace their pain, let them know that it hurts you too. Let them know that just as your heart's broken, I'm sure God's heart's broken. But I think what they need more than anything is someone to get alongside them, someone to care for them. And there is no easy answer, and it's one of those questions I think that we all face in terms of our Christian faith, and we just can't put it into a nice bow and tie it up. It's just going to be something that's always there, and we're always going to just be like, why God? But the cool thing is you can take your why to God, you can point fingers at God, and his shoulders are big enough for it. So again, I'm sorry, that doesn't seem like a really good answer to what is a really real and meaningful question, but that's the best I got. It's the best I got. And if that's you and that's your experience, and if you're a parent and you're like, this is my thing right now, and like I hope it's not, but maybe it might be someone's thing next year or next decade or at some point. I just know there's some incredible people in our church, and just go and talk to them and sit with them and ask them to come and sit with you, and they'll sit with you and go like, how do I talk to my 11-year-old about this? How do I have that conversation? I know there's people in this room that would come and sit alongside you and help you have that conversation. So please don't ever feel that if you're getting asked this question, or this is a reality that is in your situation at the moment, that you have to deal with it alone. There's people around that would be willing to and want to walk towards the brokenness with you, not just leave you there on your own to figure it out. So please do reach out if that's where you are. Today's question is, it's another biggie. It's this, and again, this is a question that a lot of people have asked. And the way we've framed it is this way: how do I reconcile the killing in the Old Testament with the loving God presented in the New? The question can get asked so many different ways. You might say it this way: I'm having a hard time with the God of the Old Testament. How can the same God who told people to love their enemies seemingly just tell others to go and kill an entire group of people, wipe out entire cities? And the truth is, this isn't just a theoretical question or a skeptic's question. It's one of the most serious challenges, I think, in all of Christianity. Now, maybe you've read through the Old Testament and you've thought, wait, this doesn't sound like the Jesus I know. Can I suggest that you're not alone? Smart people, both strong believers and skeptics, have been wrestling with this question for centuries. And honestly, anyone who dismisses this question quickly hasn't understood either the question or the faith that they're really trying to defend. And this is what makes it so confusing, right? On the one hand, we've got Jesus who's there, and he says to us to love our enemies, turn the other cheek. And then we've got God commanding what appears to be genocide in the Old Testament. And this is the reaction that some people may have already got boiling up on the inside of them. Clint, just defend the Bible and move on. Others are thinking, maybe we need to admit the Bible has some problems. And honestly, I understand both of those reactions. But what if there's a third way? What if there's a better way to approach this? What if the real challenge that we have here is holding together and bringing together both the holiness of God and the love of God? Two attributes of God that seem to be in tension, but are actually inseparable. What if the question we really need to ask isn't, how could a loving God command killing? What if the real question is, what does this tell us about how seriously God takes justice? Well, what if we stop looking at this and saying, well, why would God do that? But we just ask the question and pose the question this way: how serious is God about justice? And we all kind of want God to be just, right? We want him to take justice seriously. Because we've been on the side of things where people have hurt us, where people have done things to us that are unfair. We've seen others hurt other people, and something on the inside of us, our blood boils up a bit when we read about someone mistreating those people in that way, or someone did that to you, or someone maybe did that and treated your parents like this, or treated your kids like this, or treated someone you love like that. And there's something on the inside of you that says you want justice, right? And I'm not saying you're going to go out and seek revenge or do anything like that, but there's something in you's like, hey, that person should pay for what they did to him. That person should be held accountable for the way they treated her. That person should be held to account for the way they treated all of those people. And it's interesting because on the inside, like this is, if we want to get real honest with ourselves, we all really want to be loved, and we want to be showing grace when we do something wrong. But when someone else does something wrong, we're a little bit more okay with justice, aren't we? Like, I might not need justice for me because I'm good most of the time and I had good intentions. But you, on the other hand, when you do something wrong, I want to see justice kick in because you did something to hurt me or hurt those close to me or hurt this group of people, and it's just not right. We may not want to be held to account, but we certainly want others to be, especially those who have wronged us. And so this conundrum kind of leaves us in this place where we've got to grapple with some big fundamental questions about God, right? About the nature of God, his love, his justice, his holiness, even stuff around moral authority. So some people, again, will resolve this by saying, man, well, the Old Testament's just wrong or it's primitive and ignore it. Others will resolve it by saying, hey, we shouldn't question God's actions. And both these answers, again, just miss something important. They miss the fact that God can and God does hold in perfect unity his holiness and his justice alongside his love. And so let me just give you a big picture understanding here. And again, this might sound, a little bit academic, but I think it's important for us to get it. We've got to understand, firstly, that Jesus is the ultimate revelation of who God is. If you want to know what God is like, don't start with Abraham, don't start with Joseph, don't start with Joshua, start with Jesus. Jesus was very, very clear. He says, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. This isn't a suggestion that Jesus made, it's a claim. He didn't suggest, if you want to understand what God's like, look at me. He made a claim. You've seen me, therefore you've seen the Father. If you read the New Testament, it really makes it clear that Jesus is loving. That's how he's presented throughout the New Testament. I'll say this time and time again, but the Apostle John, when he was reflecting on who Jesus was, and he's putting pen to paper and he's trying to describe who God is, he's just like, God is, he's like, how do I say this? This will do it. Love. God is love. And so with the idea that Jesus is the ultimate revelation, let's just rewind the clock back a little bit and go into the history of the Old Testament. Because what we've got to understand is that there's the progressive nature of revelation. As God reveals himself to humanity, that it progresses. And so more of God's exposed to humanity. This means that God reveals himself gradually, working within the cultures and the limitations of each era. And what's really, really important about this is this doesn't mean that God changes as time goes by. God doesn't change. He is the same then as he is today, as he always will be. He is incredibly consistent. He does not change. But it means our appreciation for who he does change, and the way that he's able to reveal himself helps us see more of who he really is. It might be like you've got to present something. You've got to help a 5-year-old understand how a vehicle works. You're going to give them a very different explanation than you might give a 14-year-old, who you're going to give a very different explanation than you are maybe an engineering student. Does that make sense? It's the same car. It works in the same way, but the language and the way you use to communicate that to a 5-year-old is going to be different than a 14 and an engineering student. Why? Because they've got a different ability to understand the concepts with which you might be talking about. And so there's sort of a progressive revelation as to how a vehicle works. It's the same with God. Throughout the Old Testament, what we do is we see this pattern. That the people are told something, they start to do what they're told not to do. They're warned, and then punishment comes. And on the flip side of that punishment always comes the possibility of restoration and grace. And when we see this happen, people are told something, people don't do it, there's punishment, and then there's an opportunity of grace and restoration if they do what's right. And again, the people generally start doing what's right, then they do what's wrong. Punishment comes, the offer of restoration and grace. And I don't know about you, but I'm very thankful because I see that pattern come out in my life quite often. Right? As I follow Jesus, I want to make wise decisions. I want to do what Jesus commands me, and I kind of know what I'm told to do. And then what happens is sometimes I'm really good at doing that, and all of a sudden I'm not. And I'm so thankful that when I'm not, that it's just not like that's not the end of it. That offer of restoration and grace is there. But this is the same for me, and it's the same for you. Like that's a pattern that just goes on and on as I go through life, right? I think I'm doing well, and then all of a sudden something hits me, and it's like, no, you're not. But that offer of restoration and grace is there, and then I get up, and then I keep going, and bang, I do something wrong again. And then that offer's there. It's quite amazing. But that's what we see happen throughout the Old Testament. This pattern, judgment, followed by the possibility of restoration and grace. And what we see in Jesus, it doesn't contradict the Old Testament understanding of God's justice. Rather, Jesus fulfills it by taking that justice upon himself. And we'll see that more later. The Old Testament really tells the story of God's people. The New Testament, if we were to simplify this right back, tells the story of God's heart. Jesus didn't come to simply continue the Old Testament story. Jesus came to fulfill the Old Testament story and to start something new. We, as Christians, for those of us who are Christians, we don't follow the Old Testament law like they did because we're not Old Testament people. Rather, we follow Jesus because he established a new covenant, a new promise with humanity, one that is better than what came before it. So the author of Hebrews makes this really, really clear. The author of Hebrews says this, and again, we haven't got time to dive into this much today, so feel free to go and look at this on your own. It's in Hebrews, but a couple of verses in chapter 8, it says this. It says, but in fact, the ministry Jesus has received is as superior. So this new thing that Jesus is doing is superior to theirs, as the covenant of which he is a mediator is superior to the old one, since the new covenant is established on better promises. Jesus didn't come to continue the Old Testament covenant. No. Jesus came to give us a new covenant, which is better because the promises are better. The author of Hebrew goes on just a few verses later and says, by calling this covenant new, he, Jesus, has made the first one obsolete. And what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear. Jesus didn't come to continue the story. Jesus came to fulfill what was in the Old Testament and to offer something new. Now, what this means is this: the way that God operated there and then the way that God operates here is just slightly different. There was a promise back there, and then it's essentially, testament means covenant, which means promise. There's the old promise and then there is the new promise. The old promise required people to fulfill the law, to do what's right, and then to go and apologize, essentially make an offering when they did something wrong, and it was just keep going on and on and on. What Jesus offers in the new promise is that, hey, he would take on all that justice. He would take on all of that wrath. He would have all of it put upon himself so that we don't have it put upon us. And that he would make one ultimate sacrifice, so we don't need to make sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice for all the wrong that we do. But this is a pattern that we see throughout history, that God was always having to punish people, but then he was giving you the opportunity of grace and restoration. And so you're sitting here, and if you're tracking with me, you might think, man, there's a few reasons you've got to push back on this. I still don't get it. I've read the Old Testament. It looks like genocide. I've read the New Testament. We've presented it as a picture of Jesus' love. Let me just maybe address a few of the things you could be pushing back on. Some of you might be saying, well, Clinton, you're just cherry picking here. You're just picking this and you're picking that and you're ignoring that. Well, what we've got to understand is that this isn't simply ignoring parts of the Bible, but it's rather about having a proper understanding of the parts of the Bible that we're supposed to follow. Jesus himself, he said he came to fulfill the law, not to extend it. Paul said that the law was our guardian until Christ came. He says it this way, and Paul says it this way in Galatians. He says, let me put it another way. The law was our guardian until Christ came. It protected us until we could be made right with God through faith. That's the way of the new covenant. So some people might hear going, well, Clint, you're just rationalizing this. You're just rationalizing this big thing. And I understand that this really does sound like I'm rationalizing it. But I just want to pause for a moment and let us consider the alternative. The alternative here is that there is no God. And if there is no God, then the strong just dominate the weak. And then there's no such thing as justice at all, is there? If there's no God, the strong dominate the weak. And if the strong dominate the weak, where's the justice in that? There is no justice. And there's something in you that knows the importance of justice. There's something in you, as we talked about before, that just stirs up when you see an injustice. Because you know justice is important. That feeling comes from somewhere. Another pushback that some people in the room might have as well, what about biblical authority? What about biblical authority? Can I suggest to you that the Bible is authoritative, but Jesus is ultimate. The Bible points to Jesus. Jesus doesn't point to the Bible. In fact, the Bible that we've got today didn't even exist in its entirety when Jesus walked on this planet. The reason we've got the Bible is because of the remarkable things that Jesus did. People thought, man, we've got to write about this. We've got to get this down. And God, using those people, got it down. But we've got to understand the Bible's authoritative, but Jesus is ultimate. Here's an example. So think of a birth certificate. My birth certificate is authoritative. My birth certificate would tell you that I was born in a place called Eyre, Australia, on the 5th of July, 1983. That my mum is Donna Marie Craig, that my father is Stephen Roy Craig. It would have a little bit more information about the occupations and stuff like that on there. And it will tell you where I was born. It might even have, I'm not sure, I don't look at it very often, the exact time I was born. It's authoritative. My birth certificate documents the fact that I was born then. But the ultimate way to see that I was born then is to see that, hey, here I am. I'm alive. I'm a person. I'm not a person because my birth certificate says so. I'm a person with or without a birth certificate. All my birth certificate does is document the fact that that's when I was born and that's when I was come to life. It's authoritative, but it's not ultimate. When it comes to understanding who God is, the Bible is authoritative. Jesus is ultimate. And then another question here, and this ties back to the question we looked at before that came in the box. What about innocent suffering? What about innocent suffering? When we read these accounts in the Old Testament and all of these people had to pay a price, the ultimate price. You say, well, what's going on there, God? Is there not innocent suffering going on here? Can I suggest that the problem of innocent suffering exists no matter what worldview we hold? Innocent suffering happens all around the world, in every context, in every culture. It's happened throughout history. You cannot get away from innocent suffering. It happens. What we need to think through is which worldview provides the resources to address innocent suffering. Taking Jesus seriously means we've got to take his claim to be the final revelation seriously. And if you're grappling with this question around, hey, innocent suffering, it actually says something really, really, really important about you. Well, what it says about you is that you have a strong sense of moral outrage about innocent suffering, right? But there's something inside of you that's like that moral outrage is there because it's not fair that that would be wrong. It's not fair that they're treated like that. It's not right. Think about it, right? You get outraged at injustice. We want something done about human trafficking. We want something done about child abuse, about genocide. When we read about that and we hear about that, some of us, it's easier to flick to the next article because it's just like, it just unsettles us so much that we have to go to the next thing. Because of that's moral outrage that's there. Where do you think that moral outrage comes from? The very fact that you and I are troubled by these accounts suggests that we believe in moral objective standards. But if there is no God, then morality is just a human opinion. And if morality is just an opinion, then you and I, we have no grounds for moral outrage about anything, including these biblical accounts. Maybe these Old Testament accounts aren't about God being mean. Maybe they're about God being just in ways that are hard for you and for I to understand. And maybe, just maybe, your moral outrage about some of this is actually evidence that you've been made in the image of a just God. Because your desire for justice has come from somewhere. And because you're made in God's image, odds suggest that your moral outrage, your desire for justice comes because he is a God who is perfectly just. And so if we ask what's really going on under this question, how do I reconcile the killing of the Old Testament with the loving God that's presented in the New? Here's what I think. If we're really willing to look in the mirror, we want a God who's just enough to deal with evil, but who's not so just that he makes us uncomfortable. Our culture that we live in has made personal autonomy and individual rights the highest of all values. But what if there are higher values than personal autonomy and individual rights? What if there are higher values like justice, like holiness, like the ultimate good of all of creation? You see, the same moral sense that makes us uncomfortable with the Old Testament violence should make us grateful for New Testament grace. Every question about God's justice should drive us to Jesus. Because it's in Jesus where justice and mercy meet. That's what Jesus did on the cross. When he went to the cross, that satisfied God's need for justice, but it also showed us God's heart for us and the mercy that he extends to every single one of us. The ultimate answer to the question, how do I reconcile the killing in the Old Testament with the loving God presented in the New? It isn't found in us defending every Old Testament narrative. It's found in our understanding that those narratives point towards Jesus. See, at the cross, we see both God's perfect justice, the fact that sin must be punished, and his perfect love, and that he takes that punishment on himself. Jesus breaks the pattern of judgment and restoration by taking the final judgment on himself, making eternal restoration possible for everyone who believes. When there's tension between how God appears in the Old Testament and how Jesus reveals God, Jesus wins every time, hands down. And again, some of you are thinking, Clinton, this is intellectual, but it doesn't resolve that emotional struggle that I've got with these passages. It doesn't help me deal with that emotional turmoil that I've got on the inside of me. And that's okay. That's okay. Because your faith isn't dependent on you solving every Old Testament puzzle. Your coming to faith isn't dependent on you solving every Old Testament puzzle. It's dependent on your willingness to trust Jesus. Faith doesn't require that we understand everything. It requires that we trust the character of God as presented and revealed in Jesus. When you can't understand God's actions, you can still trust God's character. And God's character is most clearly revealed in Jesus. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So whether you're struggling with doubt or questions around this, and maybe this doesn't even help you, maybe this has just created more questions, maybe it's created, hopefully not, but maybe it's created more doubts. Can I suggest to you that doesn't disqualify you from faith? All it does is prove that you're human. Because this is a question that's always been there and will always be there. And so here's what I want to challenge you with. What if you started reading the Old Testament as the story that leads to Jesus rather than the story that defines Jesus? Instead of demanding that God explain himself to you, what would happen if you started acknowledging that a God worth worshipping might be beyond your complete understanding? A God that is worth us worshipping and honoring and bowing down before. Doesn't it make sense that we can't wrap our heads around all that he does and all that he is and who he really truly is and all of his characteristics? If he's really worth worshipping, if he's really worth bowing down to, if he really is worth putting first in our life, don't you think there's going to be parts of him that we can't understand, that we can't comprehend? Come on, if you and I could understand God, we're belittling him down to something smaller than us. And do you know what you and I do when we belittle God down? What we do is we make himself a little version of us because we want to be God. But if he's really worth worshipping, if he's really worth putting as number one in your life, come on, you have to admit, you've got to acknowledge that there's parts of God I don't understand. That he might have ways that are beyond my ways. He might have thoughts that are beyond my thoughts. That's what makes him worth worshipping. What if instead of asking, how could God do that, we started asking, what does Jesus show us about God's heart? What if the resolution to this tension isn't found in intellectual arguments alone, but in the person of Jesus who embodies perfect justice and perfect love? See, the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament are the same God. A God who is both just and a God who is loving. And it's Jesus who shows us what God is really like. We don't have to choose between God's justice and God's love. Because of the cross, we've got the perfect demonstration of God's justice and God's love coming together that we can look to, that we can lean into. God isn't trying to hide his justice or his love. He put it out on full display. He's trying to reveal both. He is a just God and he is a loving God. He is going to hold things to account and he's going to love you unconditionally. That is what he can do. His story doesn't end with judgment. His story ends with Jesus and the resurrection, where justice is satisfied, where mercy triumphs, and where love wins forever. Don't know if this satisfies all of that intellectual itch you might have around this question, but I'll tell you, there's a million resources out there that can help you. What I want us to understand is God brought this together so perfectly, so completely on the cross. Because on the cross, we see justice and his love come together. The truth is, as much as we don't want to admit it, we've all done wrong. We should be held to account for the wrong that we've done. Jesus bore our punishment on the cross so we don't have to bear it. He took it. That punishment has been paid for by him because God loves you so much. All we have to do is thank him for it. That's what makes Christianity so special. It enables us to follow a God who is perfectly just and perfectly loving. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, it's impossible for us to wrap our heads around all that you are. You are beyond our comprehension. Your ways are higher than our ways. Your thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And so, Lord, we always wrestle with and we always struggle with some of these questions. But we thank you so much that our faith isn't found on, and our faith isn't determined by our ability to answer them all neatly and put a bow on the box that brings the stuff together. And we thank you that you made it so clear by sending Jesus as to what your heart is. We thank you that as you revealed yourself through history, that ultimate revelation came in the embodiment of Jesus Christ. And I pray you help all of us who are trying to understand who you are and what you're like to look to Jesus, to know what the Father is like. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Wow, Clint.